So, this is our lecture on Europe after Napoleon, which was normally we would call just the Congress of Vienna, which is in 1815. We're going to talk about a little bit more than just the Congress of Vienna, but this is one of those important concepts because this is where we're going to they're going to try to put Europe back to the way it was before Napoleon. And as you know in your own life, once you've gone into or once you've crossed over a phase in life, you really can't go back. And that was kind of the problem for Europe, is that it had gone through another phase. It had gone past the absolutes and gone through this constitutionalism, and then Napoleon, and now it's going to try to go back to what was originally, and it just doesn't work out as what they thought it was going to. So let's talk about this. So this is what Europe looks like after Napoleon, and you notice that Prussia gained some territory out of this, and so there you see this split of Prussia on two sides. Austria, you're going to see here, has gained a little bit of territory, especially its control over here, Venice. Um, and you're going to see Sardinia, which now has this territory of Piedmont. So it's Piedmont and Sardinia now. That's going to be their territory. And Spain and France are now broken up. Spain's back at its own glory. And of course, the major power here is going to be England. All right. So now, when they meet, the Congress of Vienna has multiple meetings, but it was part banquet, part ball, part treaty signing. And so this is how this is all going to work, is that these powers are going to come together. Now, of course, the big players in this, one, we have the Tsar of Russia, okay, was Alexander the First. We're going to have Metternich, which is going to be, he's going to figure heavily into this and setting this on tone, because Austria's Metternich is going to be the person who we're going to see as the kind of bastion of conservatism. Francis Talleyrand. Talleyrand is a survivor. This guy is like the cockroach of politics. He served under Louis the 16th. He served the National Convention. He served Napoleon, and now he serves the Bourbons on the throne in the form of Louis the 18th. You're going to have Prussia. You're going to have King Frederick the Wilhelm III, and all these people. Frederick wants to gain power, and he's pushing for German unification. Metternich, of course, is pushing for German unification, but under him and Austria. But he wants to hold back this tide of nationalism. Alexander's role in here, Alexander the First, is kind of a reformer. He wants to get Russia onto the scene. He wants Russia to become westernized. And as we said, this is that whole Russia makes one step forward, one step back. We'll talk more about this in class. And then, of course, Talleyrand's just like, please don't take everything. So this is where we're at going into the Congress of Vienna. And so what we basically see from it, as you see here, Congress, they were criticized for basically ignoring all liberal and nationalistic ideas. Their goal is to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and they want to support this idea of conservatism in the form of monarchs, in the form of tradition, the roles of the Catholic Church. And so that's where they're at. They were denouncing these ideas of nationalism and liberalism that the French Revolution basically inspired and started. So there's this very much of holding it back. That's what they want to go back to the way it was. They're ignoring all aspects of nationalism that are coming out of this. And they ignore the concepts of nationhood. Like Poland is still divided. Ireland is still an issue for England. The ideas of German unification are not brought up, or the ideas of Italy unification are not brought up. So, and they're totally not addressing any of the diversities that take place in these lands. Like in Austria, is basically, and the Ottoman Empire is just this congregation, this whole, like, just all these different ethnic groups, religiously, politically, economically, they're none of these people match. There's Catholics and Orthodox, and there are Turks, and there are Greeks, and there are in Austria there are Czechs, there are Hungarians, there are Germans, there are, I mean, there's so many different groups that's feeding a conflict that's coming. So it doesn't deal with any of the problems. They just ignore all the ideas of liberalism, this idea of representation and equal, equal rule and individual rights. They ignore all the stuff that came out of the French Revolution, act like it never happened. And then on top of it, then they ignore all the things that Napoleon caused, which was all those ideas of nationalism and national identity. So you can see where this is not going to go well. Okay. And um, this idea of creating a balance of power. So to keep these things in check, they know there's things out there. It's not just that you're ignoring the ideas of nationalism and liberalism. They're also going to they're not going to ignore them, but they're going to set up a system to where they can prevent those ideas from coming to the surface and moving through society. So how they're going to do this is they're going to create alliances with each other between the Prussians, the English, the French, the Austrians, the Russians, to hold back any of these things. So if one revolution starts, I'm not going to let another French Revolution thing happen. If one of these things starts going, then the others will step in and put it down, whether it's a revolution or a Napoleon. So it's one of these things that we all work together like some psychotic version of the Justice League. They're going to come in and stop anything from happening in the nationalistic or in the liberal concepts. So if rebellions happen, and that also keeps wars then down. So we're not going to see these big Napoleonic strife that we'd seen before. Where like we're not going to see even before this with the 7 Years' War or with the War of Austrian Secession or the American Revolution. You're not going to see these European conflicts on massive scales you'd seen before, because the alliance systems and this idea of keeping this balance of power between the sides is going to prevent major wars from happening. Now, there are going to be some minor dust ups. There are going to be things like the Crimea War, and there's going to be things like the 7 Weeks War, or the Danish Austro-Prussian War, or eventually the Franco-Prussian War. But they're small little wars. They're contained. They're not brought all of Europe into them, and even the amount of casualties aren't equal to what you're going to see in obviously what's coming. And this idea of holding back any type of conflict is what's going to magnify World War I, and why German unification in 1870-71 is going to be so important is that's going to finally end that balance of power where Germans and English and French were all working together to prevent these ideas of nationalism and ideas of national growth. And it's going to basically inspire competition. And so you're going to see powers going to grow and conflict with each other. And that's what it's going to lead to World War I. And the fact that there were no major conflicts before this, that's what's going to lead to the scale that World War I is going to be. They don't understand what they're getting themselves into because they hadn't seen it. In America, we had these conflicts happening. We'd had the American Civil War. And in Europe, they didn't have anything like this because they were basically containing it. And they once they stopped containing it, it came out wholeheartedly. So here's a cartoon about the one we're going to see, and there's not going to be just one. These congresses. So you have the Congress of Vienna, and then you're going to have the Congress of Verona, and you're going to have other congresses where they come together to kind of hold back these things. So, sorry, there we go. So the principles that basically collective security will be established during this, and so as you see, as we go through each one of these, is that the idea is when there's a dust up, the other ones step in. So Belgium concern of troops, its border causes major power remove or their power, and so basically you're going to have this alliance comes in to hold back France, not to maintain power, right? You're going to have another one where you're going to see a dust up over Spain in this one, all right. in the Congress of Lubeck. You're going to see the alliance, the Holy Alliance. And the Holy Alliance was basically it's England by this point comes out. By Verona, England stays away from one of these, right? The Holy Alliance was the major players of Russia, Austria, the Prussians, they're all the members of this. England's not going to join this Holy Alliance, and neither does the Pope, which makes you kind of think, how's this a holy one? And also, if it's religious, why aren't you pulling the Ottomans into this? But the Ottoman Empire and the English are going to stay out of many of these. The Ottomans aren't going to be invited. And the fact the English, though, they're going to back out of these because of what else is happening. By 1830, you're going to have the Opium Wars. By 1825, the English are taking over and won major conflicts in India and are slowly taking over India with this after the Sepoy Rebellion. And so England's concerns are no longer on the continent. She's basically like, well, that's happening there. As long as what's happening on the continent does not interfere with us, then we don't care. And so with the Congress of Verona and this idea of the Holy Alliance is basically going to go in with the French to establish a Bourbon control over the this area. Um, you're not going to see the English participating. And this is what led to the, like it says in the slide, the Monroe Doctrine, is that with the Monroe Doctrine, the English are basically saying, look, this is what this part of the world looks like, that the Spanish colonies, the English colonies in the Caribbean, French colonies is a status quo. As long as no one messes with anyone else's stuff, then we're good. Because they basically decided that the Caribbean is no longer a thing they need. They're finding they can make sugar and then get better products out of India and China that's more of a burden. The Caribbean is, and it's basically costing them money, not making them money. So they turn over the Western Hemisphere to the English or to the Americans, sorry, in the form of the Monroe Doctrine, that we basically govern this part of the hemisphere for the English, and the English will back us up with the English ships. Well, that allows them then to ignore the Caribbean and focus more on other parts of the world. So this concert system of where you're going to have these alliances and these meetings that are going to go, all right, we had this dust up in France. So we're going to go in and back up after the Congress of Verona. We're going to go in and back up the French because there's a rebellion that takes place, and we're going to create a Bourbon dynasty in control. We're going to put Louis the 18th on the throne there. We're going to see, the problem in Sicily. We're going to meet at Labac, and we're going to basically come to agreement that we're going to restore the king of the Sicilies and they're trying to put back these monarchies is what they're trying to do. But without the major player in the form of England, there's really no teeth to this thing. And as long as England's out there distracted by the shiny objects like India and China, they're not paying attention to what's happening on the continent. And this status quo is maintained for another 50 years. And then when Germany becomes a thing, that upsets this, and that's when England starts to pay more attention, and that begins the battleship. Like if those we've all survived World War One or U.S. history, this is where that battleship conflict starts, where England builds one, then Germany builds one. That was the kind of this thing. As long as you maintain the status quo, everyone's happy. England's distracted, not paying attention to the continent. As long as the continent doesn't mess with England, England ignores the continent. It's there looming like this big power thing, but it's there. Okay. So now, and obviously, like we said, the Congress system will go all the way until the unifications of Italy and Germany. By that point, especially Germany, once that happens, that's out the window, and that begins what we call obviously the treaty system, the alliance systems, where you see the triple entente, the triple alliance, which then turn into the allies and the Central Powers in World War One. But they haven't addressed any of these things. The nationalism in the pan-Slavic areas, this pan-Slavism, which is this pride in the Slavic identity and culture, which is going to feed into Russia and feed into the Serbians, and it's going to cause the assassination of the Archduke. They're not addressing that. The German unification that's going to be driven by nationalism that then gets out of control in 1914 as Germany can't be insulted by the English, or the fact that they're not addressing that. The fact that you're going to have um, the Irish are going to start a war against the English, and what's going to manifest itself in the Easter Rebellion in 1860 or 1916. They're not addressing that. They're not addressing any of the things that really truly are the threats to Europe that's coming. They're just kind of ignoring it and tamping it down, like they've got their finger on top of it, hoping that the bleeding will stop, and it's just not going to stop. It's not. Now, the liberalism we talked about, liberalism obviously comes from it, it's a French traditional English and French political ideas that comes from those traditions of equal representation, freedom of speech, things like that. It definitely comes from Locke, Smith, Rousseau. um, Locke's idea of a social contract where the state is, you know represents the will of the people and is elected through the people, that there's a limited constitution on, that you see also that feeds through Montesquieu. These are very liberal ideas, and the ideas of individual rights and individual property, that I have a right to own this property. I have a right to say what I wish. I have a right to go to the church I want to go to. These are all things that are fed into Locke's idea as the representation of the government through the people. So these are truly liberal ideas that we're talking about. The ideas of individual rights, individual representation, and the government then adheres to those things. And we saw those in the readings that you did in class with Constant, the idea that basically the rights of the individual stop at the rights of the rights of the state. The power of the state stops at the rights of the individual. Or Mills's idea that as long as basically you're not harming anyone else, that's your sphere, that your rights, basically, as long as your rights don't infringe on the rights of someone else, you're okay. And that the state should never interfere with those things. With John Stuart Mills's ideas, that's what we're talking about. Those are traditional liberal ideas. All right. Adam Smith would be that manifested in economics, that the invisible hand, that if I can convince someone to buy this product, then they should have a right to buy that product, and the state should not interfere in that idea, that it should be the market and individual choice that governs my profitability, not that the king favors this product over that product. And this obviously came out in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nation. Conservatives basically look at the opposite direction. They want traditional ruling classes. And it's weird. You'd think that the peasants would support the liberals, but you have to understand that liberalism seems like chaos. It's this out of control, chaotic thing that literally threatens their way of life. They want stability. They want the ideas of monarchs, and that because the train runs on time, right? That basically I know what tomorrow is going to be. That's why peasants and romantic writers, it's that idea of order in society. That society is full of order, tradition. That's why you see, like in England, and it's gonna be different. Okay, in England, the conservative still wants the king, but they want parliament. It's more of social order. Upper class or upper class, lower class or lower class, and every man knows his place in society. That's the conservative, church, government, economics. Those are all the ideas that are favored by English conservatives. Conservatives like Metternich want to bring back the monarchies. They want to bring back the power of the Catholic Church. So in England, it's more of a class issue of God and country, and your place in society. You are, you know, poor, you're poor. If you're upper class, you're upper class, and then they don't cross. You're not the commoner is not going to talk to the the rich lady on the street. Okay, whereas in England, in France and in um, Austria, in Germany, it's the king, it's the church, it's the social order, and that's why like I said, liberalism, it's chaos because people get to pick. And chaos is not what people in peasantry, they want to know that they can go farm. They don't see liberalism as affecting them like the middle class would. So they view history as a straight line, whereas liberals see it as this constantly taking a tangent. When the society goes one way, then the whole line of history goes a different way. Conservatives think it's beginning and end, it's just straight through. Okay. They promote stability. They, not this progress and changing in society stuff. It's just stability, that we know how things are going to go. Political authority, religion, all key parts of conservatism. They reject this idea of a social contract because they favor more the idea that a contract between God and the people, not the people and the state. And they've truly denounced the ideas of individualism and naturalism in natural rights because they see those as a threat to stability. If everyone thinks that they're special, then nothing's special, is how they would look at it. And so, therefore, it creates chaos, and that chaos is what led to things like the French Revolution. And so that's what the conservatives, they want to maintain social order by going back to the way things were and maintaining that idea of where your place is in society. And again, that's the hierarchy concept. That's more the English thing, and I mean other places are going to have it too. You're a peasant. You're a peasant. You're a serf. You're a serf. In England, it's very much of your middle class, your upper class. Mr. Darcy, and everyone knows their position. You'll see this if you watch any of the British shows, that the help doesn't talk to the people of the manor, kind of thing. Look at that very Victorian English kind of, like Downton Abbey or something like that, or Bridgerton, that the lower classes have to know their place and that they don't talk to the people in the upper class. Okay. And so that's that kind of knowing your social, and that maintains social order because they do have a concept of liberalism. They have a representative government in the form of the parliament. But there's also a pushback in England is to keep certain classes from voting. Whereas in German states or in France, it's about keeping voting in general away. In England, it's like, well, why do we want the people who don't own a house to be able to vote? Why do we want women to be able to vote? Why do we want to vote? Have people that work in factories vote? Even though they do have a vote in England, that's the kind of the concept we're talking about. So conservatives, obviously, we're going to talk about Burke. That you can't do this rapid change kind of thing. Frederick Hegel, in his studies of history, he's going to promote the ideas of the synthesis, is that you're going to have the antithesis, right? And the thesis, and they conflict with each other, and that leads to the synthesis, right? And so, but Burke's ideas, and that's that continuum concept. Burke, he just thinks that you can't just radically flip a switch. Change comes into society slowly over time. And then if you take out the religious and cultural concepts, and that destroys the very foundations of a society. We're going to really see these ideas of conservatism is through Metternich in Austria, is that he wants German unification, but he wants that idea of a a Großdeutsch, all Germans. Where later we're going to see Kleindeutsch under Bismarck, where it's just Germans for Germans. This guy wants all Germans, but he wants it done in a traditional manner. All right. He wants to keep these ideas of kings and monarchs and social status and the Catholic Church. He wants to keep all those things in place. And we're going to see the idea that Prussia is basically pushed out during this time period. And there's going to be this there are going to be several rebellions and attempts at nationalism. And best example is what you saw in the reading is the Carlsbad decrees come from what we call the Burschenschaften, which is like student associations. They basically they work out and stuff like this, and they're very nationalistic. They want to create German unification. And like we saw here, the push out with Frederick basically creates this council, establishes 8 provinces that he's kind of he has to deal with the Junkers, whereas these agreements that we're going to see with Metternich, who basically is kind of controlling vast areas here. There is a nationalistic movement through these college students. Carl Sand murders a dramatist, okay, named August von Kutzba, and he then is put on trial. These things are hugely anti-Semitic. Also, they would get together, they'd work out, they talk politics, and they're basically talking about rising up, creating a nationalistic German, Großdeutsch state. And he then, Carl Sand, is then executed for this. And because of this is the execution of Carl Sand, I always wonder about this sword thing. If he swings this, does he cut this guy in half? That just doesn't seem right. But the Carlsbad decrees are these massive steps to rein in free thought, anti government attitudes and ideas, and at the same time to stop nationalistic movements. So even though Metternich does want some type of German unification, he wants it in the old traditional ways that they'll unify the state together as one traditional monarchy concept. Whereas these people want to overthrow the system and create a whole new economic political system by unifying Germany. And he puts an end to this by using spies and basically banning teachers from teaching things that are not approved by the state, and banning books that he feels are a threat to the social order. So, and this is that Burschenschaften that we're talking about. And so the now what we're going to talk about in class is many of these revolutionary movements. And so in the next lecture, we'll go through some of these, like the Peterloo Massacre and some of those that we don't talk about in class. So we're going to stop right here, and then we'll talk more about what happens like with the Peterloo Massacre and the other ones that we don't talk about in class.